You're listening to Honestly Aging by Friends Life Care VigR, a podcast where we explore what it's like getting older, the peaks, the valleys, and everything in between. In this season of Honestly Aging by Friends Life Care VigR, we're covering topics related to vibrant aging. I'm your host, Cheryl Praska. Let's grow old together. On today's episode, I'm joined by Lori Rizzo, who is an end-of-life doula and certified dementia practitioner. Lori is the owner of Compassionate Crossings, where she provides emotional, physical, and spiritual support during the end-of-life process through an array of care. In addition, Lori is a hospice volunteer and photographer. Lori, welcome and thank you for being here. How are you today?
Thank you, Cheryl. I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
So, Lori, you're joining me today to talk about your experience as an end-of-life doula.
Mhm.
Can you start by introducing yourself and talking about what led you to become an end-of-life doula?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for asking. Well, you did a great introduction. I'll add that I'm also what's called a death literacy specialist, which is someone who has a lot of knowledge, through my work to help people with everything related to death and dying. And my path to becoming a doula was really deeply personal and shaped mainly by the time at my mother's bedside and the days leading up to her death. And for me, witnessing death and dying firsthand was really life changing. And along with my family and my sweet mom, we all faced the complexities of death and dying. And for me, it was really the first time as an adult. So from that, I eventually found my purpose. I come from a corporate background. I consider myself a recovering corporate um, team member, and so grateful to be doing this work now. And my experiences as a hospice volunteer, along with my training and experiences as a doula, really just drive my dedication to supporting others and approaching end of life with purpose and intention and connection. And because that is what it felt like in my family. And I recognized at the time that there's a need for that. And I certainly learned along the way, in more detail, of some of the gaps in our society and culture, healthcare system, all around, in helping um, us mortals face our immortality. And then when it is time, kind of all the complexities that come with it, you know. So that was my how I got into it, and I have not looked back. Again, so grateful to be doing this work. To me, it took some time to discern and accept. It felt like a calling, a real up where I needed to be. So that's my story.
And something that resonated really strongly with me was when you were talking about dealing with death as the first time as an adult.
Mm.
And the first time I dealt with death as an adult was with my grandfather. And I remember how lucky I felt that my family came together during that time and also in supporting my grandmother. And I know that doesn't happen all the time, and luck is not necessarily associated with death. However, that's how I felt. And thank goodness we had that family system for that time, which was very difficult.
Yes, yes, a strong family system, any family at all. Many people,
Mm,
as you know, I know you've talked a lot about solo aging, and for other reasons, people are alone. Yeah, or at least they don't
so
have the relationships that help support them
yeah.
and each other. Yeah, that's really something. It's good that you noticed that and recognized it, um, because it's not always like that. Yeah.
So, an end of life doula is a new concept for
Mm.
me. And I'd love it if you could provide more detail for our listeners about what an end of life doula does.
Sure. More detail than in the introduction, is is I provide gentle and supportive guidance to individuals and families that are facing end of life. People who want such support may work with me as early as like an initial diagnosis, or as late as the beginnings of the active dying phase, or even after death, if
Mm,
bereavement care is what they're seeking. So I'm a holistic non-medical guide offering comfort, emotional support, spiritual support, practical support. Unfortunately, our culture often avoids conversations about death and dying, and leaves a lot of us unprepared at the time. And the reality is that a life-limiting illness is incredibly demanding, certainly emotionally, but also physically and practically. There's just a lot to do and a lot to think about. And so I help people at that time to navigate difficult choices, um, answer questions or get answers to questions, take care of tasks so that they can focus on what truly matters to them at end of life. I become like a trusted member of the care team.
mm,
And that trust is so important because there's a need to develop a rapport. I'm going into people's, lives. I'm being invited in to like their intimate family situations. So it's truly an honor. And I have to kind of show up to become that trusted member. We only die once, right? And there's certainly a lot of fear that comes with that. Um, so I help to create a safe space for people to share their feelings about whatever is happening without judgment, of course, and without the history of being part of their lives. So I can hold space for all the feelings from everyone involved. So I will and do often work with the family as well as the individual who is dying. We can explore life review, legacy, helping planning a bedside vigil, which is not something a lot of people think about, but how can we create and foster a peaceful and serene atmosphere and like a beautiful, meaningful goodbye when that time comes. Certainly, care partners, family members who are thrust into caregiving roles are overwhelmed. The system doesn't really provide adequate support. So as a doula, I'm also walking alongside those folks and other grieving loved ones to listen or lending a helping hand, just really anything that's needed that's within my scope of services and skills. So the support, comforting presence, providing solace, companionship. Sometimes people just want to talk, and it's sometimes easier to talk to someone who is not related or doesn't have the relationship. It's just an outsider who will just hold space and validate their feelings. And because grief certainly comes up early on, we don't just grieve when someone dies. We start grieving whenever. I experienced anticipatory grief with my mother
mm,
when she was diagnosed, and she lived for 2 years, and I didn't understand that. I didn't have anyone to kind of point out to me that that was normal. Of course I was scared. She had cancer. That's a big word. It's not something that we want to face. So I have to meet people where they are in all aspects of their being. So whether they have a diagnosis or just starting to contemplate their mortality, I can support them at any point. And to me, it's really never too early or soon to start planning for the discussions. Um, Spirituality comes in. I honor people where they, what their beliefs and practices are, providing support, resources as needed, or um, rituals or beliefs that they may have, which might include incorporating music or art or energy healing. It is a holistic approach, of the whole person. And while hospice is a vital resource, it's just one piece of the puzzle. It's also often misunderstood and avoided and seen as, giving up.
mm.
And I understand all of that, and everyone's feelings are valid, but I want to help bridge that with families that, here's how we utilize hospice and here's why it's so helpful. And, one of the staggering statistics I learned is like 10% of hospice patients are only on service for 2 days or less. And that could be some people who, have a very quick decline, but often it's just no, no, not yet, not yet. And hospice doesn't mean that it's the end, but it does mean that you're getting a supportive service for comfort care, for bodily or personal needs, I should say, things that maybe are hard for the family to do, or they don't have skills in. So I collaborate closely with them. I walk alongside hospice and other medical professionals to advocate for my clients and ensure that their needs are met. Also providing education on death and dying, because there's certainly a lot of questions around that. So overall, I think my purpose is to ensure that those that are facing the end of their lives and their loved ones feel supported, informed, and guided through their end of life journey. Mhm.
And what came up the strongest for me was how beneficial it would be to have an individual like you who understands the system, who has experience with death and dying, because it is unknown. We don't know what's going to
Right.
happen. As with a birth doula, you know somewhat about that process, and that's the only experience I've had with a doula myself. So
Yeah.
just thinking about how beneficial it would be to have a individual to guide you through, be grounded, be supportive. You don't have the whole backstory of everything to, put your own opinions of the family in place would be so beneficial, dealing with those strong feelings of fear and the anticipatory grief, which I never heard that before,
Mm.
but I know how that feels.
Yeah, yeah. It's something I thought was happening to me only. And I think that's
Mm.
part of the education and part of supporting folks that are going through it, is that no, this is normal. It doesn't feel good. It's grief, but you're not doing anything wrong. It makes sense, right? I mean, when you can look at it as, you know, your husband is in this situation, of course you're grieving. You're anticipating what's next. Will there be pain? What will I do when he's gone? There's just so many feelings that are going on. So it really is encompasses the whole circle, whoever that is around that person. Yeah.
So I'm curious,
Mhm.
what kind of training or qualifications are needed to even work in this field?
That's a great question. To me, first and foremost is compassion. Unconditional regard for others, and it is an emerging field. So there's not currently a regulatory body that like oversees the field, but those of us who do this work have several trainings to choose from. There's a movement going on in this world of some people call it the death positive movement. Some people call it
Hmm.
death literacy, and certainly in the end of life doula world, there's a lot of training. I trained with an organization that's been doing it for a long time, called INELDA, International End of Life Doula Association. The training itself is end of life doula training, and it covers planning, right, exploring meaning, um, some of the things I mentioned earlier, and then also cultural sensitivity and deep active listening, grief. Um, there also includes what dying or what end of life might be like. So we can never predict exactly. And as a non-medical person, um, I despite being non-medical, I do have training and experience with looking and knowing some of the signs, again, for educational purposes and also for paying attention, right? Maybe there's more needs than we know about from a medical perspective, like with pain management and things like that. And along my journey, I've also felt a pull to learn more about dementia. And so I've also completed specialized training to support those living with dementia and their loved ones, because dementia presents at end of life in different ways than other conditions. And again, there's no one way, of course, all disease processes are different. But I help individuals that are living with dementia and their families and care partners to understand the unique care journey ahead for them. Dementia is an end-of-life diagnosis. Of course, people can live for many years, and there needs to be more education and support to make a difference in ensuring quality of life for those folks and their families. So I work with families to understand how to care for their loved ones from an emotional perspective, um, and create a meaningful experience. So that was another part of my training. I've also had a lot of grief training because it's definitely, as I mentioned, part of how I can support, support families.
So all of your experiences and your training have led you to where you are today. And I'd be interested in hearing, what is your approach to end of life care?
Hmm. Um, I think what I've kind of already alluded to is like a family-centered approach, where, the individual and their family, they're all form a unit. So I don't replace partners or family members or other care partners, but again, like I said, I work alongside as an added layer of support. So my approach is presence, um, being a good listener, witnessing, what's happening, being a calming influence, nurturing, um, emotional support, as I mentioned, always part of the doula's role. My approach again is a lot of education, as needed and desired, of course, but offering the the option for people to understand a little bit more about whatever is happening. Um, so I think that's a lot of my approach. Also guidance, is trying to help anticipate needs and then help make a plan. Um,
Mhm.
that could be for visitors. Too many visitors sometimes is a lot. So I might be able to help with, kind of running things, being again a calming presence. Just one example. Um, but resources and referrals, to other community resources or care providers, um, to to have more services as needed. So yeah, I think as a non-medical, non-judgmental support, my approach is to guide individuals and families through that, in a nurturing and supportive way, and empowering them as much as I can, to speak up, and to say what's needed.
So let's get into, how do you help your clients with their final wishes?
Well, I mean, advanced care directives, healthcare directives are an obvious one. Some people may have done that with their lawyer or just on their own, and they may have it in place, but when it's not, and the person can still speak for themselves, that's something that I um, encourage, that conversation and help with that conversation. Final wishes are more than just the healthcare directives, though. It's helping them to communicate their needs emotionally as well. People who are nearing death, they see things from a different perspective. So they may be seeking forgiveness or desire to forgive someone. And I can help facilitate those conversations, maybe be present, maybe not, but to help them come up with ways that they can have conversations. Maybe it's writing a letter if it's too hard. Maybe it's leaving something. I mean, letters are really a beautiful way to
Yeah.
express when it's a situation that has maybe been hard to have actual conversations. There are so many variables within that individual's life and what their wishes are. I haven't gotten to do this yet, but I know other doulas I've heard have had the honor of maybe taking them somewhere that they want to go.
Mhm.
If someone is well enough. My mentor, I remember I was so excited when I heard her tell me one time that she was in Atlantic City with her client who wanted to go there one more time, and was well enough to do that, and physically. So, final wishes, again, there's just it's a broad subject, but I think the communication and the talking about it and making it okay to say, well, what do you need? What would you like? We can try. We can't fulfill right? Sometimes the final wish is to die at home,
Mhm.
and we can do all we can, but it's not always possible. But at least we knew that that's what they wanted, right? And what can we do to make where they are more like home? So yeah, final wishes is I love when people have them though, because at least they're expressing their needs. And we go through life a lot of times not asking for what we need from our loved ones. And it seems like when it's near death, many people then have the courage to ask
Hmm.
for what they need. And then many don't. It just depends.
Would you prefer to age independently in your own home or live in a nursing facility? I know what I'd rather do. Friends Life Care membership offers just that. Plan today for a future lived at home with vitality, independence, growth, and resilience while protecting your savings. Learn about your options at a free seminar or webinar. Register at friendslifecare.org/register or call 215-628-8964. I loved your examples of what an end of life doula has done as far as taking someone to Atlantic City or setting up a bedside visual.
Mhm.
I'm curious whether there are any other examples where you've helped an individual or family with end of life care you'd be willing to share.
Yeah, sort of in line with some of the things I was just talking about. I was working with a family. It was a husband and wife. They didn't have any children, and they didn't have healthcare advance directives. And that was something that was really important for the husband to know. And I don't know why, and I didn't ask. How come they've never talked about it before? Even something like, do you want to be buried or cremated? Or something else, because there are other options now. Do how do you want to be treated? So we did spend the time with his wife, to open up that conversation while she was still alert and aware cognitively, and from that, because now that we knew her wishes, and again, it goes beyond just the healthcare, like, did she want a lot of people around her? Even asking the question, because some people are afraid to die alone. Is that important? And that was important to her. She did not want to die alone. And what does that look like? Because she was not at home, because she
Mhm.
was in a skilled nursing facility, nobody was staying with her. So part of our journey from the time that we did the advanced care directives and when it was closer to her significant decline, I spent time educating and supporting the husband emotionally, and her, visiting, seeing what she needed, offering other ideas of how she could be more comfortable. And when it came time, I did bring up the option of getting a hospice consult with her husband. And it's a hard decision. It was even hard for me to suggest it, because I don't make decisions for people. But again, as a guidance and as a supportive presence, here's what we're seeing. And because she was in a skilled care facility, um, she was getting care, but mostly from CNAs. And I was watching her decline, and he and I talked about it. And there didn't seem to be a lot of concern, from the staff.
Mm.
But eventually, after he and I talked about it, and with that, I educated why it was a good idea. Like, I don't know how much time she has, but they have a way of determining if that person might be, 6 months or less left.
Mhm.
And I explained to him how, if that's what they think, if that's what they believe, then we can, um, fulfill her wishes of being comfortable, and not being in pain and being taken care of, um, in a way that provides that, rather than holding off and waiting and waiting and waiting until she's in more pain than needed. So there's a lot of emotions with that. But what I did then was I was able to sort of take on the task of calling hospice, figuring out, finding the right one for her, making that all happen, because it could have been done by the facility and they just would have come in, but then he wouldn't have been as involved. So it's really important to advocate. So by me helping him with all of that and then explaining everything that was happening, every next step, and then we waited. So then hospice was involved, and so I think she lived maybe like 3 more weeks.
Wow.
So, or maybe a little bit longer. Um, he and I also talked about her vigil, and we knew what she liked. She was already surrounded by a lot of art. She was an artist, and she already had a lot of visitors, which was wonderful. And we also talked about, what that would look like when you're home and you're in your own space. You have, your things and your atmosphere. And she was in a care in a skilled nursing facility, and when we closed the door, all of the sounds and the smells and the hurry was behind the door, and we were just in with her, and we created an atmosphere with music and lighting that was very serene. And I was with them when she passed, and the whole family, it was a small family, but the whole family was there. It was peaceful. They were grateful that she wasn't in pain. And I know that I helped that happen just by having these conversations with him. Um, would she have gone on hospice eventually? Yes. And he would have been confused about what was happening. She would have been, it would just have been less dignified, less
I'm
peaceful.
I'm tearing up hearing about that because it sounds like it's taking such a tough situation and making it not only more bearable, but making it really special
Yeah.
and attuned to the dying individual as well as the loved ones. I can imagine walking into that room and feeling peace and comfort, and that this this is what this person wanted,
Yeah.
and this is what's so sad. This is what's going to happen.
Yeah.
However, at least it this situation can be what they wanted. Just
Exactly.
beautiful.
You just have a little bit more, I don't know if control is the right word, but a little bit more, you know, thought put into it, and more meaningful, because it is sad. It is going to happen anyway. Right?
Yeah.
So if we can talk and plan and think about it a little and find out those needs, wishes, then we can do all we can to make that happen. And I was fortunate enough then to work with him after as well for her life celebration. You mentioned I'm a photographer. I have some graphic skills, and she was an artist. So we set up a gallery in her church where her life celebration was, and it was upbeat, and the way she would have wanted, the way he would have wanted it. I mean, he did a lot of the work, but I helped put it all together. Some of her art was in a school. She had painted these beautiful murals in a local school, and I went and photographed them, and we got them printed like 8 feet long, and I forget how high, because they were murals. And we brought the art into the life celebration, and people brought her art because she was always giving it. She didn't sell it. She was a teacher. She was an artist. She gave her talents and her love, to others, and they brought them in. And all of that had to be coordinated and, set up. So it's a lot of work. And I was so grateful to be a part of that and honor her, in such a meaningful way.
And it sounds like she left her art as a legacy, and you talked about leaving letters. I've heard of legacy letters
Mhm.
before, and I understand that legacy work can be part of end of life planning. How else have you found yourself helping clients leave a legacy?
Yeah, it's so individualized, and it clearly reflects, that individual. But looking at legacy as as more of the impact we have on others, right? And the values we pass on and the difference we make in the world. Like, we're not all artists or wealthy, to leave something like tangible, right? And, you know, I, I think it would be so wonderful if we can all start to think now about what kind of legacy we want to leave behind. It's really never too early to start thinking about those things. But I help people, look at their lives again through life review, or perhaps there was something big in their life that is very meaningful. But to talk about like what do you want your legacy to be? It doesn't have to be difficult. It doesn't have to be a big project like that was for her. um, but what aspects of their life do they think shaped their legacy and who they are? So we can explore that, reflect on it, and then think about how to ensure that's happening. So I did mention the letters, um, and some other projects, we might call them legacy projects in the doula world, could involve photos, recipes, memory books, forming a scholarship fund or some kind of charitable fund, writing a memoir, which in the
Mm.
past I would say, oh, that's like only something like a writer could do. And certainly if you are, great. Maybe we can find someone. I know another doula who will do that, for someone to interview, and or there's other simpler ways to do it. We have so many tools now with technology that help us to document, family history and the stories. So the makeup, and the execution of legacy, um, can be big or small, and but needs to reflect who the person is, their ideas about who they are and what they want. And it can also involve family and grandchildren, anyone in their life, if it's a project, right? Which might be something
Mhm.
people can do while we're sitting around, kind of, visiting and talking and being together. Definitely going through photos. I so wish that my family had done that with my parents. But it's not too late either. I am working on a legacy project currently, that will be a memory book about my parents' lives, incorporating photos and letters and stories and other history that I have, for my family. And it's something I want to do, for myself, but also because they deserve to be remembered. And I know enough about them that I'm just going to do the best I can about how they would want to be remembered. So it's never too late, but it's also, something that is, beautiful to work on, when someone is still here and when they're able to be involved. And I learned about something called an ethical will, which I absolutely love. And this can be something that's a simple, project, if you will, is to leave behind, your story yourself to your family. It's different than a memoir, but it could include, like, again, your values, your stories, your life lessons. Explain why you made decisions in your life. What, you know big memories that come to them that shaped who they are. And I love that, because yes, you can leave money and you can leave things and possessions, but leaving the essence of who you are for other people to learn from, whether they were your mistakes or your successes, and to carry on that legacy in the form of our own behavior and how we want to be. In some cases, not always, of course, but emulate who that person was and learn from their life well lived. And that's, of course, in a very perfect situation, not in a perfect situation, but there are times when there's not, maybe good memories or
Mhm.
great relationships. Um, that it becomes maybe a little bit more difficult. But that's again where the conversations and the hard conversations can come in, not necessarily related to legacy, but to forgiveness and to, moving on and to expressing love.
And that's a gift,
It
to
is.
be able to have those difficult conversations and maybe find forgiveness or relief from some of
Mhm.
those feelings that can be so tight.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, we're talking about people who we know are going to die, which is a
Mm.
gift. As hard as it is, to watch a loved one decline, either physically or cognitively or both, um, that is a difference than like a sudden, or traumatic death, which many of us have experienced as well, which kind of goes back to, kind of talking and thinking about these things ahead of time, because we never know. It's just part of life. We don't know when our time is.
So with death, inevitably comes grief.
Mhm.
And I have to imagine you deal with grief so often. How do you go about handling the grief of your clients and your own emotions
Mm.
being exposed to death and dying so often?
As I learned more about grief, and how it affects us emotionally, physically, even our brains, everything is involved in how we feel grief. It was something else I was really drawn to learning more about, um, because we are already in it when someone is dying. As I mentioned, the anticipatory grief, it is real. And as a death doula, as an end-of-life doula, it is a big part of my work is to provide bereavement support. So how I handle it is with compassion and open heart, being a safe support, non-judgmental, and a lot of validation for whatever the feelings are, because it brings up all the feelings. It brings up
Yeah.
anger and guilt, in addition to sadness and heartbreak, right? They're all valid. Like, we, as a society, as a culture, don't really handle grief very well. It's something else that maybe we don't talk about or think about, or want to be part of until it happens to us. And then there doesn't, I don't want to say there's never support, but well-meaning friends and family will not always be the best support. They don't always know what to say. We haven't been taught this, right? We really haven't. So, for someone to say, think positive and don't give up hope when
Hmm.
someone's on hospice is, to a family member or to the person, is probably not very helpful. So
Hmm.
what I do is hold space for all the feelings and validate all the feelings, because you can't, in those moments of despair, you can't always help how you feel. And if it is anger because maybe you don't have a good relationship with that person, that's a valid feeling, and then we can talk through that. um, and for the person who's nearing death, of course there's also grief, and again, a lot of feelings. I don't personally know what it feels like to know that I'm dying, but I can
Hmm.
listen and again validate and acknowledge how it feels for them. The holding space is not about, for grief, is not about fixing, making, you know, I can't make the reality go away. It's still here. Um, and saying well-meaning things like, you've lived a long life, or you're so blessed you have, children and a husband. No, that's is not probably what someone wants to hear at that time. So to me, to handle or to approach their grief is just with an open heart, and and being able to allow them to express it, because we have to go through it. Grief isn't
Hmm.
a diagnosis. It's not something, that we're doing wrong. It's not, um, it's a part of life. It's a part of life, and we all, we all go through it. It's kind of cliche, but I've heard so many times, you have grief because you loved. You can't have both. Um,
Wow.
and if it's about yourself, there's a lot of regrets. There's a lot of looking back on life and feeling, oh, I wish, so that needs to be worked through. I mean, think, like, wouldn't it be nice to be able to have the opportunity to kind of get that out, um, in a way to like help accept, what's happening.
Absolutely.
It's,
Absolutely.
yeah. So unbiased, non-judgmental, and for myself, you know, I, I know about grief, so I have to look at what the situation, and I do get close to people, but there's also, a way that I don't know how, I can't really explain it, to be honest. I'm extremely sensitive. So, and if it's personal, I will cry, I will feel it. And as a professional, it's such a helping kind of profession, and I do get so close with people. I feel it, but I have my own practices to stay grounded, whether it's meditation or talking to, I have a lot of doula friends, or my therapist, my spouse. Like, I also have people in my life that I can, express what I'm feeling when it comes to the grief of my clients, or the death of my clients.
So I never know how these conversations are going to go. And you've been so generous in all your answers. My next two questions may bring up some repetitive points. So, if so, for our listeners, that's totally understandable. We're hearing about all this for the first time for
Yeah.
me. So, I just want to put that out there. I still would love to get your highlights on these two questions, because I think that would still be informative for the listeners.
Mhm.
So, all that to say, what advice would you give our listeners about end of life planning?
Um, I think planning is the key word. And being open to discussing death and dying. Because even we can avoid it, but it'll still touch us. Facing mortality is certainly complex, and we can easily avoid it if we're healthy and we're living. But we also have people in our lives, right? So it's a conversation sometimes shrouded in silence, and it's, again, it's part of the culture. So it's almost taboo sometimes. I know this. I always joke because I used to be the life of the party, but now people say, "Oh, what are you doing?" And I tell them, and they're like, "Nobody wants to hear about this. We're trying to have fun," And I want to
Oh.
open up the conversation in a way like, "Oh no, it's part of life," because we're not used to it. So what if we reframed it? What if we reframed talking about death and dying as a way to um, realize it's a natural part of life, understand we have 100% chance of dying. And I don't mean to be flippant with that, but we do as of now. And what if talking about death is indeed really more talking about life and living and
Mm.
hopes and dreams and love and connection and sorrow and sadness, and like, what if planning for it is living for now, because the plan, well, we're planning for something inevitable. So, and a health crisis is not the time to kind of figure out this plan. I mean, we have to, but also talking about it doesn't hasten its arrival. Just talking it now, unless you're super superstitious, have some kind of belief, but it's really true. And I really want people to take that away. Planning just makes us more prepared. Talking about it just makes us more open. Being supportive to loved ones is giving them permission to feel that they're, especially with maybe aging parents, or a sibling that is not having health problems. They need to know that while it's hard for us, we're also there with them, right? So those conversations help bring that support to the forefront for when it's needed. I'm not advocating, talking about death and dying every day and being morbid and negative. It's more about acknowledging it,
Mhm.
acknowledging that it's part of life.
Anything else to say about how people can best support their loved ones who are nearing death?
Yeah, I think um, what I've learned is that, and I believe that dying is, again, it's a profoundly human and spiritual journey. It's not a medical event. And we can make it a medical event, um, by not facing, maybe when it's time to maybe stop treatment, or to ask the questions about, well, what does more treatment mean? You know,
Mhm.
but it's not a medical event. It's a time for reflection and connection and preparation. And I think to support loved ones, and what I help is to create that supportive environment where they can explore their values, fears, and hopes in a safe container and a compassionate space. Um, and that involves addressing physical needs, attending to the emotional and psychological and spiritual dimensions. So I believe we can provide a meaningful and supportive, you know, experience by honoring the whole person. And so I think families and loved ones and friends can keep that in mind and know that it's not about me only, it's about all of us, and especially the person who's facing this. So asking, the hard questions of your loved one and the medical team, helping them talk about what they want. Sometimes doctors do come up with more treatment options, so those are the hard questions. What is the difference between quality of life and quantity of days?
Mm.
you know if it means your loved one stops dialysis because it's taking all the strength out of them, and that also means that they'll have less days, but they'll also have better quality of life, to bring them home, maybe, if possible. These aren't easy decisions to make. Again, this is, I don't mean it's like, oh, this is so easy, but it's just another way that I think families can approach it. And I don't make them for them. I just kind of help lead them to a place where they can really discuss them and hold space for the questions and the fears. So we are fortunate to live in a time when medical interventions can provide comfort care, right? So, easing the transition for those approaching, so there's not pain and suffering. It's not about heroic measures when it's close to death. It's not about more treatment to delay the inevitable. It's about supporting the individual and and how they can have a peaceful, dignified death, which I think everybody wants for their loved ones. I don't think you
Course.
ever meet someone who wouldn't say it's, oh, at least he wasn't in pain, right? And so many people wish to die in their sleep. So there's no fear and no pain.
Yes.
And yeah, that sounds great. And yet we can't, we can't predict that.
So, for our listeners who are interested in learning more about end of life doula services,
Mhm.
what resources might you be able to recommend? Of course, including yourself.
Thanks. Yes, I do have information on my website. Always happy to talk to folks with questions. No obligation. I love to teach and help people like kind of think about things. But end of life doulas come from everywhere and have varying
Mm.
interesting skills. So we are kind of like our own person. While there's a lot of um, you know services that overlap with others. Some people have skill sets in other areas. But as I mentioned, the field is new, but I don't know if I mentioned NEDA earlier. I'm sorry if I did. It's the National End-of-Life Doula Alliance, and it was created
Mm.
with doulas of several years ago to have a place where we can come together with um, the scope of practice and the code of ethics and the core competencies that are needed to help us be better doulas, to help us have to encompass all that's needed for a holistic approach. So they're a great place for people to go. They have a directory. On it.
Mhm.
It's listed by state, and they also have a proficiency badge, which signifies that an individual has met the core competencies. So along with the end of life doula training and the other trainings I have, I'm also NEDA proficient. So I have their endorsement. They have so much information that's helpful for families on their website, not just about doulas, but also, about other aspects of death and dying. So I would start there, and it's NEDA, NED Alliance.org. So great place to go for information about this field. Yeah, thanks for asking.
And before we close,
Mhm.
is there a final message that you would like to share with our listeners?
Mm. That was went fast, huh? Yeah, I think this is a big question. And, I think I would leave with the listeners, like, if you knew and fully accepted the situation that, you had 1 year to live, and if that is not your situation right now, you already know that and you're listening, um, what would you do differently, right? And who would you be? Um, and I think that awareness holds a really strange power over us, that awareness of our mortality, that it can really make life all the more precious. So when we realize and truly acknowledge that our time is finite, it casts a spotlight on what truly matters to us. So since death is universal, right? It's a reality. Um, Acknowledging it doesn't have to be a source of fear, and it is, and it's okay if it is. But if we can look at and instead approach it with curiosity, love, intention, and a shared goal of living life, uh, and talking about death and dying can really be a catalyst for growth and connection. So let's have these conversations driven by like a genuine desire to understand life's meaning and live it more fully. And our curiosity, doesn't again have to rely on frequent reminders of our mortality, but in more of a deep reflection of how we want to use our limited time on this earth. And we really can foster deeper connections with ourselves and those around us by approaching these conversations, with that curiosity and connection. So I think that's my final thought. Let's talk about this.
And thank you. Thank you so much
Well, thank you.
for really opening the conversation about death and dying, which can be certainly hard to do, as well as sharing and introducing what an end of life doula does and the help that you can provide. I'm just so flattered you were on the podcast
Oh,
and we're so willing to share. Thank you.
no, thank you. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to educate about my work and about life.
Thank you for listening to Honestly Aging by Friends Life Care VigR, a unique program focused on aging with vitality, independence, growth, and resilience. You can find links and show notes from this episode on our website at friendslifecare.org/podcast. Thank you to Lori Rizzo for joining us today. You can learn more about Lori and Compassionate Crossings by visiting compassionatecrossingsdoula.com, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. If you like our show, please rate, review, subscribe, and join us next time. To learn more about aging with vitality, independence, growth, and resilience, subscribe to our blog at friendslifecare.org/blog.